Quarterback tampering. Is your school going to be one of those that loses its backup quarterback? Maybe its starting quarterback?
Locked On presents The Portal, the daily podcast covering college football recruiting and everything NIL. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back into the Portal Podcast, where you get your daily recruiting, NIL, and transfer portal news. I'm your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football writer and recruiting analyst. Thank you for making the Portal Podcast your first listen each and every day. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Tampering. It happens all over college football, and right now there's probably at least a half dozen to 10 players at whatever school you root for that are getting messages or backdoor channels to somebody they know, a high school trainer they work out, whatever it is, to try to get them to transfer. How does it work? What's going on with it? And specifically, your quarterback, is he getting tampered with? We're going to talk about that throughout the show. We've got a handful of guys at some major programs we think there's going to be some movement with. And to help me break all of it down, John Garcia Jr., Rivals.com, joins me every week here on the Portal Podcast on Wednesdays. John, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Just trying to keep up with everything like you, my friend.
Yeah, that's not possible. You and me times 10 can't keep up with everything as much as we try, but we hit the high points. That's what we're here for, because there are more guys going in the portal that I don't even know who they are. It's insane. But today we're focusing on quarterbacks. And I just wanted to get this out of the way because today is officially the day the portal opens. It's the 16th. It will close a week from this Friday. John, we both talk about the portal constantly because we know people are getting tampered with. We know how this works. The objective today is explain to people why it happens, how it happens, and some of the key guys. So first thing for you, I just want to throw something out there. Like Notre Dame was one of the very few teams that actually had their game on television. I know it's on Peacock, whatever, but it was still televised. I've had coaches tell me to my face that their school is not having it because they don't want film of their players that are coming up the ranks to get swiped out of the portal. Like I asked, what's going on? Why you guys not on TV? Less than 1 second later, the answer was almost out. Like, boom. There was no hesitation. But Notre Dame looks like, I think, maybe I'm wrong, but CJ Carr is going to be the guy that leaves Steve Angeli and Kenny Minchey, guys that are talented. I'm just using them as a barometer. 100% guarantee you they're getting tampered with. Explain to these folks out here listening on the Portal Podcast what you know about it and why this happens.
It happens because it's necessary, right? I mean, how many guys jumped in the portal that opened hours ago as we record this, and they've already signed and sealed and delivered to their new school, right? Jaden Ott goes from Cal to Oklahoma. I just saw before we jumped on, Tavoy Fagan goes from Clemson to Ole Miss. These deals, quite literally, are done ahead of time. You don't jump in the portal as a legitimate prospect without some type of plan going forward. Now, sometimes it is circumstantial. I know we'll talk Nico Iamaleava later, and it's a little bit of a different deal. But for the most part, these guys we see jumping in, there is at least a skeleton plan in place. And that plan is built through tampering. You use your trainers, your high school coaches, your family, the people who the NCAA rules do not intersect with, to communicate with additional programs, boosters, whoever is needed to, feel comfortable about making a very big and public move like jumping in the transfer portal. So it's a necessary evil in one sense until the rules and regulations, fluctuate one way or the other. It's just something that is going to happen. It's the new, duffel bag full of cash or whatever you want to call it. That's the new version of it. The information is that value, because now these deals and situations can be flipped in a matter of hours. And oftentimes 99% of the time it is before the portal window officially opens. That's why you see so many guys going public with their intention to jump in the portal, sometimes days and weeks before April 16th. And this window was no different.
It's ironic because I've been told, and not everybody's going to know this kid, but Sawyer Robertson, the quarterback at Baylor, it's well documented by numerous podcasts, people that like Oklahoma went after him originally. They end up getting the young man to come down from Washington State. Had to take his coordinator too to do it.
Yeah, I was going to say,
but
they're invested.
Yeah, they're very invested. Look, you can say whatever you want, but like this is year 3 for the OU staff. If you think they're not tampering with somebody somewhere, you're crazy. If you're an OU, everybody wants to think their school's clean. Look, that's not how this works. There is nobody that is 100% clean. I don't give a crap who you are. That's how this works. But they get their guy. Here are a few other guys that like allegedly have been tampered with. Can you imagine what Sam Leavitt from Arizona State? Like, he's a dude. He's got multiple years of eligibility left, and he's projected to be a guy that could be in the draft. I give him credit. His ASU doesn't have, to my knowledge, a whole lot of NIL. They probably had to pony up at least some for Sam, I would assume, but he stuck around. But he's the exception. You and I, a couple of years ago, had a chance to see Austin Novosad out in LA. He's the backup to Dante Moore at Oregon. I guarantee you there are people trying to get – he was really good in the state of Texas. I saw him play in high school. Really good quarterback. What do you think about the guys that are highly ranked, like Leavitt's played, or Leavitt, however you say his name, but Novosad has barely hit the field in 2 years. How do you go about that if you're a school that's like, man, our quarterback situation, we just finished spring, it's not looking all that good?
Yeah. Well, look at Tennessee. Bring it back to Nico, right? I mean, this was something that clearly wasn't planned. Like Mateer leaving Wazoo, some of these were built in. You knew early. The Tulane kid going to Duke. Some of these you just knew right off the bat, hey, this was going to happen. So not only does it allow your market to be established elsewhere, but internally, at the program you're leaving, you get to sort of reshuffle your own deck and say, okay, what does our room look like now that we're going to lose our starter or our prime backup in some of these cases? So, I think, you look at a school like Tennessee and you say, hey, we weren't preparing for this, so how does that affect it? Can it all be Jake Merklinger all the time? I mean, it's something that, 2 days before the spring game, he wasn't even preparing for, right? And obviously there's time before the season starts and, high school recruiting and all that stuff. The portal's just opening. So there's still answers to be given here. But what about a school like that? It's not just about the guy. It's about the room. You mentioned Austin Novosad. Oregon loses him. Dylan Gabriel went to the draft. Dante Moore was the guy in waiting. That's why he transferred from UCLA. What do? You're very light. You've got Achilles Smith. You've got freshmen at that point. Go to Ohio State. If we think Julian Sayin is the guy, and by all indication he is, what about Lincoln Kienholz? If he departs, now you're down to freshmen. Notre Dame, you just mentioned Kenny Minchey and Steve Angeli. Both guys looked really good the other day, and Angeli obviously played in that national title game and looked good as well. What about those guys? And again, if those players leave, you're down to freshmen and pure inexperience at some of the premier programs in the country. So that's something everybody's sort of trying to deal with. And I would guess Notre Dame, Oregon, those well-run programs are preparing for it to a degree. But I'm thinking of schools like Tennessee, where you clearly a week ago were not preparing to not have Nico Iamaleava on the roster, much less, publicly in this back and forth that really, depending on how it works out, doesn't make anybody look too good, right? So it's a seminal moment in the portal era, and I think how Tennessee looks on the field this year will tell the remainder of that story, because maybe Nico's value was higher than maybe people are giving him credit for. Obviously, you don't want to berate the kid. It's not all his fault, his camp, etc. But yeah, time will tell if a couple more dollars were worth shedding his way. So I think it really works both ways in this era. But yeah, a school like Tennessee, you wouldn't think a week ago were making those backdoor phone calls to other programs just in case something happened. There probably wasn't a plan in place there. So curious to see how a big time, CFP, program last year rebounds on the other side of the coin, while these other schools try to deal with navigating the maintenance of backups and quality backups, which, as we know, is really hard to hold on to. There's not a lot of Arch Mannings out there that are just going to sit and wait and be ready to go, when their name is called. So still going to be a fascinating run in the portal, even though it's technically just day one.
When we come back, what we're just talking about right there, we're going to expand on it. Tennessee has a chance to set the market. You've got North Carolina, who John and I both think probably going to be in it. There's a player that already took a backup spot in the SEC yesterday. Got to talk about that. And we got a couple other guys that we think might hop in the portal as well. That is next here on the Portal Podcast. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. FanDuel, it makes it so easy because whether you're picking your favorite team or you're into the player props, like for me, 3-point shots are a big deal, and player totals, in other words, rebounds, scoring, those are kind of things that I'm interested in. But whatever it is, FanDuel allows you to do it. Plus, whenever the game tips off, if you didn't get your first bet in, you can also live bet. So don't miss out. Head over to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. So Tennessee is probably going to have to set the market whether they want to or not. They're in a bad spot. I talked about this a few times. I've had Mr. Kane on from Locked On Balls. Like, Merklinger's not ready. I think he had a total of 9 snaps last year. They've got a true freshman. Otherwise, you can't run a major college offense as a freshman as a general rule. Like, Arch wasn't even ready for that. And
that Heupel offense is not simple as far as we know. There hasn't been a lot of guys ready to go in that offense, year one. So good point.
Yeah, there are different opinions about his offense and how it translates to the NFL, but your point is right. Like, no freshman's going to walk in there and just do it. So they have to get somebody. Well, here's an example of that and why this is so wild. North Carolina, Bill Belichick, they're not exactly in the most advantageous spot either. Gio Lopez, a kid you and I know because he's from the state of Alabama. You've covered the state. I live in the state. He goes from the northern part of the state all the way down to South Alabama, kind of overlooked, has a redshirt freshman season that was really impressive. Gio, his stats were impressive. 205, a 311, 2,556 yards, 17 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. For a redshirt freshman, that's pretty good. And he was a big play guy, 9 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions on deep balls. Maybe he's a guy that ends up at Carolina or Tennessee or something. He could run too. He's really athletic. But how do you know if you're one of these other, like, who are we competing with? That's the thing. Like, in recruiting, you know who's on the board.
Right.
You don't even know who's on the board if you're Carolina or like, seriously.
Right.
It's very awkward.
There's a lot of buzz for Carolina with Gio right now, but you wonder again if the Chapel Hill back channels were working down to the 251 in Mobile, fine. But how does Nico jumping in the portal in the middle of those potential, let's just call them phone calls and discussions, in the middle of that, do you reset and say, hold on now? The market just changed because there's a potential first rounder who has now jumped into the transfer portal at this position. So I do think that will be fascinating. Typically, again, especially with quarterbacks who were starters at their previous school, the deals are done. Mateer to Oklahoma was pretty quick, cut and dry. I think something like that would have maybe already been publicized if it was that for Gio and North Carolina. So I wonder if Nico is the wrinkle there, because the other side of the buzz with Nico is that, we all expected, okay, maybe he just goes to the West Coast. What about USC? What about UCLA? Those have since been refuted. We know Oregon's not involved. I mean, the banner programs in the state of California and in that old Pac-12 footprint, for the most part, are sort of set. So maybe it's not going to be a going home type of situation for Nico. And if that's the case, you wonder what Carolina looks like or looks at with him, because we do understand that there's more NIL juice at Carolina than ever before. And obviously, Bill's going to be aggressive. He's going to go after the best available. That was his draft strategy with the New England Patriots, and it's got to be a strategy in the transfer portal. You need some buzz as well, and obviously Nico would bring more, no offense, compared to a Gio Lopez. But both guys are mobile, and I think that's going to be key for whoever this QB1 is going to be at North Carolina, because as our audience should understand, the trenches aren't going to be great. Transitioning at a program like that doesn't have an established history up front on offense, I think you're going to need a mobile guy to maybe, bridge some of those gaps that you might have up front while everyone's learning a new system that's very professional based, et cetera. So I think a Gio Lopez would make more sense with the eligibility he has remaining, Nico could be one and done, depending on how this year goes, wherever he ends up. So I do think Lopez long-term would make a lot more sense for Carolina, and short-term, maybe a little bit more willing to take some of those punches that are inevitably going to come the way of whoever is QB1 at UNC. So very curious there. But at the same time, the Nico market is weird. It's not obvious. And that is again a byproduct of the surprise and the lack of cross-checking that was going on, because by all indication 10 days ago, this thing was pretty smooth. And then we find out, oh, well, the collective and Nico's camp hadn't spoken since January, and it was this whole thing. And it blew up in a very short amount of time. So no one was able to sort of take that step back and really look at what this could look like for their team. And these other programs that were at once QB needy, they've already made their moves, even going to the Oregon States of the world. We mentioned Oklahoma, Miami with Carson Beck. I mean, these moves were made well ahead of time, without the knowledge that a guy like this could be available. So that will be just as fascinating. But I think, Nico himself and North Carolina themselves are going to be major players in how, the QB dominoes shake out in the portal.
When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about how there's going to be some loyalty questions. Fans root for teams. John and I get to know players. We look at it a little bit differently. You have a lot of friendships. Should fans be disappointed if the backup quarterback takes a hike and takes the check? That is next here on the Portal Podcast. It's difficult to see your guy leave, especially if you invested a long time recruiting him. Maybe he got an NIL deal out of high school and he's a backup quarterback. So let's just use an example. You and I both know Emory Williams, who's the backup at Miami. They have portaled over him.
Twice.
If he left, would you blame him? I have no idea what Emory's doing, but would you blame him?
Look, I mean, the kid got some snaps as a true freshman against Florida State, which was, something that nobody saw coming because of some injury circumstances a couple years ago. And he's struggled to see the field since because, you brought in Cam Ward, who's about to be the number one pick in 8 days. And then you brought in Carson Beck, who was the projected number one pick at this time last year. So, you've kind of over-recruited through the portal at the QB position. And the one guy who's been there, who's played, the only other one on the roster is Emory Williams. And obviously the spring game was, his latest avenue to try to impress. And there's a lot of conflicting information out there. We speak to people close to Emory and they say, the word disrespect comes up. Hey, I've been here. I've done what I'm supposed to do. Why do you keep bringing in Carson Beck? Cam Ward, I think everyone understands at this point. Fine. This was something you couldn't pass up, maybe. And look, Cam flirted with the draft last year. Miami reeled him back in with, a significant increase in the NIL space. So everyone kind of understood that because that one played out in real time. With Beck, I think it was a little bit different. Now you throw in the injury Beck's dealing with on top of that. And I think there you can create an argument for, hey, this maybe, was a little bit more controversial, relative to the team and chemistry and trying to, go for 10 wins, 2 years in a row, which has certainly become sort of the expectations down in Coral Gables. So you see both sides of it. But look, if from two perspectives, you understand this. One, the simple one is, hey, I've been here. I've bought into this system with Shannon Dawson and Mario Cristobal. I've flashed. I just haven't had that opportunity to exhale as QB1. So you understand making a move from that standpoint. And here's the other side of it. And Justin Pugh made a good point of this relative to Trevor Pena jumping in the portal from Syracuse. Not all these guys are NFL guys. So if there's a window where, look, I'm leaving a school I'm loyal to that I love, etc., but I have an opportunity in the next, we're in April, over the next 7-8 months to change mine and maybe my family's life simultaneously, even though I don't necessarily want to leave from a business standpoint and a reality standpoint relative to the NFL and the impossible odds to get to that stage. hey, I might need to just make a business decision for the next 8 months and take care of some people. We don't know everyone's personal situation, but I thought Justin Pugh made a really good point. That's the system. That's where you get mad at the system, because it was $0 for everyone at one point and everyone's doing things behind closed doors. And now it's no regulation on the money and it's out in the open and the tampering is rampant. So you got to expect the players to take advantage of it, because that is the system that we're all currently, watching right now. So in that regard, you understand, hey, playing is one thing, but potentially on the other side of it, setting something up that takes care of you or somebody close to you for that long a period of time is something that, may be too hard to pass up, even if things are good, like we all assumed with a guy like Pena and Syracuse.
I agree with that. And here's an example. Ferris State, not exactly the beacon of college football, but Trinidad Chambliss is legit. He had 51 total touchdowns last year, and Lane Kiffin, this just in, knows quarterbacks.
Yeah.
That kid's coming down to be a backup. Do you think that he got zero NIL? No, he got paid.
Yeah.
Do I really think he wanted to leave Ferris State? He was going to be a senior next year.
No, and they won. Didn't they win the Natty at their level too? Yeah.
Yeah, they won the FCS championship.
That's a victory tour right there.
So the kid, he may not even play this year. We don't know. But like Austin Simmons is next up at Ole Miss, and he's actually got more eligibility than Trinidad Chambliss. So that's an example of what John's talking about right here. It's not as cut and dry as you might think. Sometimes, like, a kid from Michigan probably doesn't fit in the culture of Northern Mississippi all that much, but he can play. He's an RPO quarterback. He had 26 passing and I think 25 rushing touchdowns. Perfect fit for Lane.
Yeah, and it's insurance, right? You understand it from the Ole Miss perspective. Hey, we're not going to rely on a teenager if something does happen to Austin Simmons, who, by all indication has a huge upside over the next couple of years. And then on the other side of it, again, we just talked about it. Ferris State, shout out to them, defending national champs. They can't come close to what Ole Miss can do for Chambliss right now. And there's no guarantee he's a pro guy. So again, if you start to think of these guys making business decisions, you understand, why some of these portal moves might appear surprising on the surface. But when you take a step back and just look at it from a human perspective, you kind of get it.
John, tell everybody where they can find your work.
Yeah, real simple, rivals.com. A ton of transfer portal stuff, as you can imagine, updated rankings. And that Iamaleava guy is sitting on top right now.
Yeah, I imagine that he is. You can find the Portal Podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and everywhere you download your podcast. Please like and subscribe and give us a 5-star review if you're downloading to listen. We will see you again soon on the Portal Podcast.